The Spire's shadow. The hum was the first thing and the last. It was a physical presence in the lower mid-levels of Hive Primus, a constant, industrial vibration that seeped up from the planet's core through countless layers of rusted infrastructure. It was the sound of 1 billion souls and 1 million machines, all trapped together on Solus, a world now severed from the light of the God Emperor. 2 centuries ago, the sky had torn open. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, a scar of bleeding impossibility across the galaxy, had swallowed their sector. The Astronomican's guiding light vanished, replaced by a swirling, malevolent bruise in the firmament that the preachers now called the Solus Scar. The warp storms that followed had stranded them, isolating Solus from the Imperium. They were on their own, a forgotten bastion in an ocean of madness, and the shadows grew longer every day. Kellen Lale felt the hum in his teeth. In the rusted grill floor of his hab unit, a metal box stacked among 1 million others in the sector known as the Mid-Spire Warrens. The air was a thick, chemical broth of recycled oxygen, promethium fumes, and the faintly sweet, cloying odor of the fungal paste that was the primary food source for 90% of the hive. His world was measured in shades of rust and gloom, illuminated only by a flickering glow globe and the sickly bioluminescence of the lichen he cultivated in a wall grill, a failed attempt to brighten the crushing monotony. His official life was that of a data scribe in the Scriptorium Secundus, a cavernous hall where the only sounds were the scratch of styli on parchment and the low murmur of recitation. For 10 hours a cycle, he would sit at a worn metal desk, his back aching, his fingers stained with ink, cross-referencing shipment manifests with cargo bay designations. It was soul-crushing work, and he cherished every mind-numbing second of it. The monotony was a shield. It required no thought, no emotion, nothing that could cause the carefully constructed walls in his mind to slip. For Kellen Lale was a psyker. His unofficial life, the one that kept him alive, was one of constant paranoid vigilance. He pictured his mind as a fortress, its walls made of plasteel and ceramite, shielding the core of his consciousness from the psychic static of the hive. It was a tempest of sensation, the fleeting joys of a found scrap, the pervasive despair of a lifetime of labor, the sharp, sudden stabs of pain and fear from the teeming masses. Since the coming of the Maledictum, the static had become a screaming gale, the veil between realms worn thin as gauze. Whispers from the other side, tantalizing and terrifying, plucked at the edges of his consciousness. His control was a taut wire, stretched to its limit. His official rations were not enough to live on, they were just enough to not die. This was the unspoken truth of the hive, a lesson learned in the gnawing hunger of his youth. So, like countless others, Kellen had a side operation. It was how he acquired the extra fungus loaf that didn't taste of ash, the occasional real protein bar that actually strengthened his limbs, or the precious thimble of sacra that granted a few hours of dreamless sleep. His thefts were petty, meticulous, and born of a talent he dared not acknowledge. He didn't use active psychic power, that was a beacon for the enforcers and worse. Instead, he relied on his latent ability, what he called the glimpse. It was a passive, barely there sense of the people around him. He could feel the lazy boredom of a guard due for a shift change, the sharp avarice of a foreman skimming from the top, or the dull resentment of a loader who no longer cared about imperial property. He wasn't reading minds, just intentions, a psychic map of threat and opportunity. Working in the Scriptorium gave him the keys to the kingdom. He saw manifests for everything, vintage amasic for the Spire nobles, rare pharmaceuticals for the Medici districts, high-grade lubricants for the pilot of the governor's personal shuttle. He focused on small, high-value items that were poorly tracked, their loss written off as transit degradation or accounting errors. His method was elegant in its simplicity. He would identify a target, use the glimpse to find the weakest link in its chain of custody, alter a single line on a parchment manifest, and his contact, a grizzled underhive fence named Greel with a face like crumpled leather, would ensure the item fell off a loader in a prearranged, unobserved subduct. The risk was astronomical. Discovery meant servitude in a penal legion at best. But the alternative was a slow, grinding decline into malnutrition and weakness, which in the competitive savagery of the hive was a death sentence in all but name. He was returning from one such successful drop, a stolen crate of Spire-quality nutrient supplements now nestled in his hidden pack, feeling a rare flicker of triumph. He'd managed to redirect the entire crate by sensing the deep-seated gambling debts of a mid-level logistics cleric, a constant, throbbing anxiety that made him desperate and inattentive. The triumph was short-lived. In the main transitway adjacent to the scriptorium, a cargo loader, overloaded and blasphemously ill-maintained, sheared its main piston. The sound was a shriek of dying metal that momentarily drowned out the hive's eternal hum, but it was the psychic scream that truly felled Kellen. The loader toppled, its multi-ton cargo of plasteel ingots crashing down with a force that shook the corridor. A young woman from the hydration dispensary, Lyra, who sometimes shared her less contaminated water ration with him and had a laugh that sounds like chimes, was caught directly beneath it. Her final moment, a microsecond of pure, unadulterated terror, a flash of pain so absolute it was beyond physical sensation, and then a silent, echoing nothingness slammed into Kellen's mind like a warp-charged hammer. It was an empathic feedback loop, her death agony amplified by his own latent power. He gasped, stumbling back from the corridor entrance. His pack, heavy with illicit goods, slipped from his shoulder and hit the ground with a metallic clang that sounded like a gunshot in his ears. A single, hot tear, her tear, traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The walls of his mental fortress groaned, cracks spiderwebbing across their surface. "Scribe Lael," a voice rasped from behind him. It was Gorl, a fellow scribe with a face like a hungry rat and eyes that missed nothing. He worked at the station opposite Kellen, his stylus always moving with a nervous, jealous energy. "You look like you've seen a ghost. That's quite a pack for a humble scribe, heavy too." Kellen forced his breath to steady, his mind frantically shoring up the defenses. He snatched up the pack, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "The noise, the accident, it startled me," he managed, his voice tight and unnatural. Gorl's eyes didn't leave the pack. Kellen, without conscious effort, glimpsed him. He felt a sharp, calculating avarice, the thrill of a predator scenting weakness, and beneath it, a thread of thrilling malice. Gorl wasn't just suspicious. He saw an opportunity for leverage, for a share of the spoils, or perhaps just the pleasure of watching a rival fall. The next few cycles were a slow-burning torture. The enforcers came to the scriptorium, two hulking brutes in scarred carapace armor. They asked about the accident, about unnatural occurrences, and reports of witchery. Kellen kept his head down, his stylus moving mechanically, but he used his glimpse on them. He felt not the dull brutality of routine duty, but a directed, zealous intent. They were hunting, and he knew, with a cold certainty that settled in his bones like a lead weight, that Gorl hadn't just reported his strange fit at the accident. He had whispered about the heavy pack, the sudden acquisitions, the scribe who lived a little too well. They weren't just looking for a witch, they were looking for a thief, and the two trails were about to catastrophically converge. High in the spire, where the air was filtered and the viewports showed the swirling, violent colors of the Solace Scar, Inquisitor Valerius of the Ordo Hereticus reviewed a data slate. His chambers were Spartan, a reflection of his discipline, save for a large, polished obsidian skull on his desk that served as a psychic damper, humming softly in the presence of the Immaterium's unnerving proximity. "The scribe Kellen Lael," Valerius mused, his voice a dry, precise instrument. He was a man of severe features, with hair the color of ash and eyes that held the cold void of deep space. Reports of a profound physical reaction at the site of a traumatic death, no visible cause. And here he tapped the slate, a sudden, unexplained improvement in his living conditions, petty theft of a surprisingly sophisticated and consistent nature. His aide, the hulking XPDF Sergeant Vorl, stood at attention, a statue of muscle and grim duty. "The enforcers believe the theft and the other matter are unrelated, my lord. They see a clever, ambitious thief, not a witch. They recommend standard interrogation and lobo-programming." "The enforcers see branches, Vorl, not roots," Valerius corrected, not looking up from the slate. "They think in terms of petty crime. I think in terms of cosmic threat. In an age of isolation, cut off from the Emperor's light by that thing in the sky," He gestured dismissively towards the viewport, his lip curling in distaste. The rules change. The veil is tissue-thin here. Psykers bloom like fungi in the dark, their powers twisted and amplified by the maledictum's proximity. Coincidence is the universe's favorite lie. This Kellen Lale is a thread. His thefts required knowledge he shouldn't have and luck that is statistically improbable. That is not luck. That is precognition, empathy, a subtle, unconscious influence on the unguarded minds of those around him. When you find a thread, you pull it. And when you pull a thread, he finally looked up, his gaze piercing, you often unravel the whole heresy. Valerius was a man of profound ambition, trapped on a backwater world at the edge of oblivion. Capturing a single, low-level psyker was a footnote in a forgotten report. But uncovering a network of them, a nest of corruption festering in the hive's underbelly, proving his vigilance and efficacy even in this lost corner of the Imperium, that was a commendation that could reach even across the Great Rift. That was a way off this rotting rock and a step closer to the halls of the Senatorum Imperialis, where true power resided. Bring him in, Valerius commanded, his decision made. His petty crimes have given us the perfect, mundane excuse. Do not mention witchcraft. Bring him in for questioning regarding the systematic theft of imperial property. Let us see what unravels when the thread is plucked. Kellen was taken not in a blaze of glory, but in the sordid, ignominious silence of his own hubris. They came for him as he met Greel in a dank, condensation-slick subduct, the transfer of a case of stolen surgical spirit underway. There were no shouts, no dramatic struggles. Vorl was simply there, a mountain of silent, implacable muscle emerging from the shadows behind Greel. The fence had time for a single strangled gasp before Vorl's massive hand clamped over his mouth and with a sickening twist broke his neck. Kellen stood frozen, the case of spirit dropping from his numb fingers. He met Vorl's gaze, seeing no malice, only the flat, professional execution of an order. A needle prick in his own neck, and the world dissolved into a chemical darkness, his last conscious thought a bitter irony. He had been caught not for being a witch, but for being a thief. He awoke in a chair, facing a stark metal desk. The room was cold, clean, and silent. The oppressive, ever-present hum of the hive was gone, replaced by a deadening quiet that was somehow more terrifying. The man sitting across from him wore simple, unadorned black robes, but his bearing screamed of absolute, unquestionable authority. On the desk between them lay the damning evidence, the surgical spirit, the nutrient supplements, the stolen data slate. Kellen Lale, Inquisitor Valerius began, his hands steepled. The Imperium takes a dim view of thieves, especially in these trying times, isolated as we are. The resources you so casually pilfer could have sustained a full squad of enforcers for a cycle. They are the thin, rusted line between order and the anarchy that laps at our walls. Kellen's heart hammered against his ribs. The walls in his mind were at their strongest, a frantic, desperate bulwark, but he could feel a pressure against them, an invisible, probing force emanating from the Inquisitor like a subtle radiation. I was hungry, my lord. The rations, they are not sufficient. I am a loyal servant of the God Emperor. I merely sought to survive, to be of continued service. The words felt like ash in his mouth. Survival, Valerius's smile was thin and bloodless, a crack in a marble facade. A noble instinct to be sure, but it does not change the fact of your crime. The penalty, as outlined in the Lex Imperialis, is the public severance of the offending hand, or if the provost marshal is feeling lenient, a decade of servitor reprogramming. Your mind wiped, your body turned into a tool for the very machine you sought to cheat. Kellen felt a cold sweat break out on his brow, his stomach clenching into a frozen knot. He saw his future, a mindless automaton hauling shells, or a crippled wretch begging in the lower ducts, a walking warning to others. However, Valerius continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that seemed to swallow the room's silence, I am prepared to be lenient. I am prepared to overlook your transgressions, because your thefts, Kellen, were remarkably precise. You knew which manifests to alter, which guards would be inattentive, which shipments were poorly logged. That is not the work of a common criminal, that is the work of a man with an unfair advantage. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Kellen's, and the psychic pressure intensified. You felt it, didn't you? The vertigo at the loader accident. You didn't just hear the noise or see the tragedy. You felt Lyra's death. Your mind touched the screaming void where her soul had been a moment before. The directness of it was a physical blow. Kellen flinched as if struck, his carefully maintained composure shattering. You are a psyker, Kellen, Valerius stated, no longer accusing but matter of fact, as one stating the time of day. A witch. Your very existence is a crime far greater than theft, a threat to the immortal God Emperor and every human soul on this world. The traditional method for dealing with your kind and the taint you spread is purgation. We burn the branch to ensure the blight is gone. Every man, woman, and child in your hab block. Your neighbors, the children who play in the corridors, the old man who shares his fungus loaf recipes. A necessary, if messy, sacrifice to contain the corruption. Kellen's visions swam. He saw old man Hem's kindly, wrinkled face, the laughing children kicking a canister cap down the hole, all of them, ash and bone, because of him. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. The other option, Valerius said, his voice now silken, hypnotic, is to serve me. Your curse can be a tool for the Imperium. You can help me find others like you, the ones who lack your control, the ones whose burgeoning powers, amplified by the maledictum's foul energy, truly threaten us all, the ones who would invite true demons into our world. You find them for me, and your past crimes are forgotten. You will be fed. You will be protected from those who would destroy you out of fear. You will have purpose. You will have penance. The choice was no choice at all. It was the cage or the fire, the slow death of servitude or the immediate, guilt-ridden annihilation of everyone he knew. With a soul-deep shame that felt heavier than the entire hive, Kellen bowed his head, a single tear of surrender tracking through the grime on his cheek. I will serve, he whispered, the words the death knell of his former self. Excellent, Valerius said, leaning back, the pressure vanishing instantly. The first lesson is this: the only true sin is getting caught. Your petty thefts were a symptom of your power, and they led me to you. From now on you will steal not for yourself, but for the Imperium. You will steal the secrets of other witches. You will be my hound, and you will be called Sanctioned Interrogator. Remember, it is a title, not a truth. Kellen was given new robes, grey and durable. He was given a cell in Valerius's Spire-side compound, clean and climate-controlled, yet as much a prison as his hab unit ever was. The silence was absolute, and in it, he could hear the screams of his conscience. His first proper meal in years, a slab of real, if tough, animal protein, and a cup of water that tasted of nothing but water, was the most terrifying feast of his life. Each bite was a covenant, a chain wrapping around his soul. His first assignment was a supposed miracle worker in the hydroponics sector, a woman named Anya whose fungal vats consistently yielded 8.3% above the hive-wide average. To the Adeptus Administratum, it was a statistical anomaly worthy of a minor commendation. To Valerius, guided by Kellen's initial, hesitant reports of a verdant warmth in the sector's psychic signature, it was a beacon of witchcraft. They stood outside her cultivation chamber, a vast, humid space that smelled of damp earth and rotting nutrients. Kellen stood flanked by Vorl and a squad of Valerius's personal storm troopers, their dark carapace armor seeming to drink the dim, filtered light. Focus, Kellen, Valerius's voice crackled in the microbead implanted in his ear. Isolate the signal, confirm the target, do not let sentiment cloud your perception. Kellen closed his eyes, leaning against the cold metal of the doorway. He took a shuddering breath, and for the first time on purpose, began to carefully lower the walls in his mind, not all the way, just enough to let the psychic static of the place wash over him. He felt the dull, vegetative consciousness of the fungi, the simple, programmed directives of the servitors tending the vats, and the low-grade anxiety of the mortal workers. And then he found it, a gentle, persistent melody of life and growth, a psychic hum that encouraged cells to divide, mycelium to spread, and fruit to swell. It was beautiful. It was a prayer to life itself in a place dedicated to mechanical existence and decay. It made him feel filthy for being there. "She is here, my lord," Kellen whispered, his voice tight with a strange grief. "The signal is clear, it's gentle, it feels pure." Chaos is a cancer that often masks itself as a cure. Kellen, Valerius's voice, was a cold corrective, a splash of ice water. Her gentleness makes her all the more insidious. She undermines the natural, imperial order of things, replacing it with a heretical, personal power. She is a gateway, and through it, eventually, would pour things that would make this sector a charnel house. Mark and contain. Vorl gestured. The stormtroopers moved with silent, brutal efficiency, breaching the chamber door with a muted charge. There were shouts of surprise, the sizzling crack of a las pistol set to stun, and a single, short psychic pulse of alarm that felt to Kellen like a startled bird taking flight. Then, silence. He was ordered inside. The woman, Anya, was on her knees, a blackened hole seared into her shoulder. Her hands were bound behind her back with stasis cuffs. She was middle-aged, her face lined with care, not malice. As Kellen approached, flanked by Vorl, her eyes found his. They were wide with pain and fear, but as they focused on him, the fear was joined by a dawning, profound understanding. She saw the flicker of power in him, the shame in his posture, the grey robes of a servant of the very regime that hunted them. She saw the hound and recognized the fellow prisoner within. Her look was not of hatred, but of a deep, soul-wrenching betrayal that would haunt Kellen for cycles to come. Kellen stumbled back, turning away from her gaze, and was violently sick into a bubbling nutrient vat. Later, in Valerius's stark office, the Inquisitor was unmoved by his distress. The first cut is always the deepest. You empathized with the host. A natural, if flawed, response. You must learn to see the disease, not the symptom. She was a vector for the ruinous powers, whether she knew it or not. Her power was a flickering candle in the dark, and it would have attracted moths that would have burned this entire hive to the ground. He paused, letting the words sink in. Remember the alternative, Kellen, the purgation of her entire sector, thousands of lives. You saved them today. Focus on that. Let that be the foundation of your penance. It was a twisted, horrific logic, but it was the only raft Kellen had in a sea of guilt. And so, he clung to it with the desperation of a drowning man. The months blurred into a grim procession of hunts. Kellen became Valerius's bloodhound, his psychic senses sharpened by constant, forced use. He tracked a man in the infernal heat of the lower manufactorum who could unjam complex assembly lines with a thought, a subtle telekinetic nudge in the right place. The man, an old-timer named Jax, was beloved by his work gang for keeping up their quotas and saving their fingers from the machinery. Kellen felt his power as a precise, mechanical click, a mind that understood machines on an intuitive, fundamental level. They took him during his sleep shift. Kellen never saw his face, but he felt the man's quiet, resigned sorrow as the stasis cuffs closed, a feeling of a useful tool being thrown on the scrap heap. He was sent into the deep underhive, a lawless vertical city of gang turfs and forgotten industries, to find a youth whose prophetic dreams were stirring a nascent cult. The boy's power was a chaotic, swirling vortex of possible futures, and being near him gave Kellen splitting headaches and visions of crumbling spires and fire in the dark. The boy was guarded by his family, who saw him as a prophet sent to lead them out of the darkness. The stormtroopers did not use stun settings that night. The psychic backlash of the boy's sudden, violent death was a silent shriek that tore through the immaterium, leaving Kellen bedridden for 2 days, his nose bleeding sluggishly. The boy's final, terrified image of his own death burned onto the back of his eyelids. With each capture, each sanctioned death, Valerius's power and reputation grew. His reports, sent via the agonized bursts of the astropathic choir through the turbulent storms of the maledictum, spoke of a vigilant and relentless purge, a bastion of purity holding fast against the encroaching dark. Commendations, filtered and delayed, trickled back from distant segmentums. Resources were reallocated to him. His authority in Hive Primus became almost absolute, a shadow that stretched from the upper spires to the deepest sump. Kellen, however, was fraying at the edges, his soul unspooling. The deaths, the betrayals, the constant exposure to the frantic, terrified psychic screams of his kind as they were dragged away were etching deep, permanent cracks in his psyche. The gentle warmth of Anya, the precise click of old Jax, the chaotic swirl of the prophet boy, they were all gone, snuffed out by his guidance. He began having nightmares not of his victims, but of a growing, hungry attention in the warp, a vast, amorphous presence that had noticed the small, repeated ripples of pain and death he was causing. It was becoming aware of him, curious. He was also changing physically and mentally. The constant use of his ability was honing it, strengthening it against his will. The glimpse became clearer, more invasive. He could now not just sense intent, but sometimes pluck surface thoughts, a fleeting image of a loved one, a remembered insult, the cold, professional fear of a stormtrooper before a breach. He felt the eddies of Valerius's own mind, not the chaotic thoughts of others, but a disciplined, focused stream of calculation, ambition, and a deep, chilling pragmatism that viewed all life, including Kellen's, as variables in a grand equation. He kept this evolution a secret from Valerius. It was his only piece of self that the Inquisitor did not own, a small, treacherous act of defiance in a life of total compliance. The hunt that defined the beginning of his end began not with a whisper, but with a scream that echoed through both the physical and psychic realms. A full squad of Hive enforcers, investigating a spate of disappearances in the abandoned or processing levels, had been found dead, not just killed. They had been unmade. Their bodies were twisted into impossible shapes, their own lasguns melted and fused to their armor. The residual psychic energy at the scene was a palpable stink of ozone, blood, and sheer madness. Valerius was, for the first time Kellen had seen, genuinely energized. "This is it," he said, pacing his office like a caged predator, his eyes alight with a fervor that was almost psychic itself. "The Nexus, the source of the corruption I have long suspected. This is no minor talent. This is a fully fledged rogue psyker, powerful, unstable, and steeped in the warp's corruption. Her name is Ilara." Kellen flinched. "You know her." "I know of her," Valerius corrected, a sharp edge to his voice. "Her signature has been a ghost on the edge of my scrying for years, a ripple in the pond, always disappearing before I could pinpoint the source. She was always too clever, too fast. But now she is sloppy. The power is corrupting her, burning her out from the inside, as it always does. She is the key, Kellen. Find her, and we cleanse this hive of its primary rot in one glorious stroke. Your penance, I promise you, will be complete." The promise was a hook in Kellen's heart. Complete. The word echoed in the hollowed-out chambers of his soul. Could it be true? Could this nightmare end? Could he walk away, his debt paid? He, Vorl, and a hand-picked team of stormtroopers descended into the abandoned levels. It was a descent into a different world, a corpse within the larger corpse of the hive. The constant hum was gone, replaced by the drip of acidic water, the skittering of unseen things, and the deep, groaning complaints of metal stressed to its breaking point. The air was thick with the smell of rust, stagnant water, and something else, a sharp metallic psychic tang that set Kellen's teeth on edge and made the hair on his arms stand up. The deeper they went, the stronger the presence became. It was no longer a signal. It was a throbbing wound in reality itself, wild, furious, and laced with a profound, bottomless grief that threatened to swallow his own. They found her in a vast chamber that had once been a primary smelting pit. Gantries stretched over a black abyss, and massive, rusted crucibles hung like dead fruit from a petrified forest. Ilara stood in the center of a makeshift platform, a gaunt, almost skeletal figure clad in robes that might once have been fine, but were now tattered and stained. Her hair was a wild, matted mane, and her eyes, when she turned them towards the intruders, burned with raw, untamed power that seemed to bleed light into the gloom. Arcane symbols, drawn in ash, and what Kellen feared was blood, covered the walls and floor around her, a desperate and dangerous attempt to ward or focus power. "You," her voice echoed, not just in the cavernous space, but directly in their minds, a scraping, nails-on-metal sensation that grated against the soul. "You bring the shadow to my door, little knife." Her gaze, blazing with contempt and pity, fixed on Kellen, the Inquisitor's pet, the hound who bites his own pack to earn a scrap from the master's table. "Stand down, witch," Vorl's voice boomed, unnervingly calm amidst the psychic pressure. His hellgun was raised, the targeter's red dot a steady, unwavering eye on her chest. Ilara laughed, a sound of shattering glass and breaking bones. "He will throw you from the spire when he is done, little knife, just like me, I was his first. His first hound, he found me, promised me the same thing, penance, purpose." Her voice rose to a screech. "He used me to find a dozen others before he decided I was too strong, too knowing." The revelation struck Kellen with the force of a physical blow. He didn't want to believe it, but his glimpse, now sharper than ever, could not deny the truth that flooded from her. He saw the memories, a younger, colder Valerius, the same promises, the same manipulations. He saw her hunts, her growing power, her dawning horror as she realized she was not a partner in a holy mission, but a tool to be used until it became too sharp to handle. And he saw Valerius's cold, clinical decision that she was becoming a liability, an asset that had accrued too much risk. "He lies," Ilara screamed, and the power within her, no longer contained, erupted outwards. It was nothing like Anya's gentle melody or Jax's precise click. It was a discordant symphony of rage, pain, and betrayal. Conduits ripped from the walls, whipping through the air like metallic serpents. One of the stormtroopers was seized by an invisible force and crushed against the ceiling with a sickening, wet crunch of ceramite and bone. Another was flung, screaming, into the abyss of the smelting pit. Vorl barked orders, his voice steady, and hellgun fire lit up the gloom, blue bolts sizzling and spattering against a shimmering, barely visible kinetic shield Ilara had conjured around herself. Kellen stood frozen, trapped between two absolute horrors. He saw Ilara, a monster, yes, but a monster of Valerius's own making, a living testament to the end of his own path. And he saw his own future, reflected in her mad, grief-stricken, yet utterly knowing eyes. In that moment of paralyzing hesitation, Ilara focused her entire being on him. It wasn't an attack of pure destruction, but one of desperate, shared understanding. She bypassed his shields not by breaking them, but by resonating with the pain, shame, and fear already festering within them. A wave of pure psychic empathy, far more potent and targeted than the blast that had killed Lyra, slammed into him. He saw her life in a torrent of flashes, a child in the underhive, discovering her power to soothe the frantic minds of those around her. Valerius finding her, a beacon of authority in her darkness, offering a way out. The first betrayal she was forced to commit, the acid burn of guilt. The slow, chilling erosion of her soul, mission by mission. The moment she overheard Valerius speaking to Vorl, the cold words, "The asset has become a liability," and her frantic flight into the darkness. And she saw his, the petty thief, the accidental death of Lyra, the shame of his compliance, the mounting power he so desperately hid, his fragile hope for redemption. "He fears you," her voice was a whisper in the very core of his being, a final, damning secret passed from one doomed soul to another. "He feels your growth, your control. You are stronger than I ever was. You are not a scalpel, you are a loaded gun pointing at his head. You are next, welcome to the end, little knife." The connection was severed by the sharp, final crack of a single, perfectly aimed las shot. Vorl, unshaken by the psychic turmoil, had found a fleeting gap in her defenses, a moment of distraction granted by her connection with Kellen. The bolt took Ilara in the temple. Her kinetic shield vanished. The psychic feedback was a silent, psychic thunderclap that threw Kellen to the ground, his mind screaming with her final, echoing thought, not of hate, but of a bitter, final welcome. The chamber fell silent, save for the crackle of sparks, the drip of water, and Kellen's ragged, soul-wrenching sobs as he lay on the cold metal grill, the taste of her truth and his own complicity ashen in his mouth. Ilara's capture and death were the crowning achievement of Inquisitor Valerius's career on Solace. The event seemed to punch a temporary hole in the warp storms. A ship, the Righteous Blade, was miraculously dispatched from a nearby system that had weathered the maledictum's fury, its sole purpose to retrieve the triumphant Inquisitor and his vital intelligence. His promotion to a High Lord within the Ordo Hereticus was now a mere formality. For Kellen, there was no triumph, only a hollow, echoing silence. The psychic wound from his connection with Ilara would not heal. He could feel the frayed edges of his own mind, and the hungry presence in the warp felt closer now, a great eye slowly opening, intrigued by the significant splash they had made in the Immaterium. It was then that the real, ultimate price of their actions became manifest. The repeated, violent deaths of psykers, the rips in the Empyrean, had not just attracted attention, they had thinned the veil to breaking point. In the deepest, most forgotten bowels of the hive, in a subsump sacrificial chamber used by a cult that Alara herself had barely kept in check, a tear opened. Not a large one, but large enough. Through it came a single figure. It was an engine of destruction clad in brutal, blood-stained ceramite of white and blue, now chipped and scarred. The butcher's nails implanted in its skull buzzed with a palpable psychic static of pure, undiluted rage. Its armor was adorned with grisly trophies and the sigils of the World Eaters. The hive, for all its isolated horror, had never known a predator like this. Alarms that had not sounded in centuries blared through the mid-levels, a panicked, electronic scream that cut through the usual hum. Inquisitor Valerius's calm, calculating facade finally cracked, replaced by a rigid, cold fury. He watched the picked feeds from the lower levels, showing the trail of dismembered enforcers and the unstoppable advance of the traitor Astartes. A chaos marine, here, drawn by the very psychic spoor we have been creating, he seethed, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. He turned to Kellen, who stood shakily before him, still haunted by Alara's death. The look in Valerius's eyes was not one of dismissal, but of a calculating, desperate need. Your penance is not yet over, Lael. The greatest threat this world has faced since its isolation walks among us. You will stand with me. You will be the shield and the needle that finds its heart. They intercepted the World Eater in the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, a vast, echoing space in the hive's core. The place was a charnel house. Pews were smashed, the great statue of the Master of Mankind was defaced with bloody glyphs, and the mangled remains of the temple's custodians and a full squad of enforcers lay scattered like broken dolls. The World Eater stood at the altar, its chain axe, murder call, idly roaring in its grip, its helmeted head tilted as it regarded the desecration it had wrought. Blood for the blood god, it bellowed, the words of physical force that shook dust from the vaulted ceiling and vibrated in Kellen's bones. The sheer, oppressive hatred of it was a tidal wave against his senses, a maelstrom of rage that promised only annihilation. Vorl's suppressive fire, pin it down, Lael its mind. The nails are a weakness, a flaw in its psyche. Find a break in the signal, a memory, anything. Now, Valerius commanded, his own plasma pistol whining to a dangerous, high-pitched charge. The storm troopers' hellgun fire pattered harmlessly against the traitor Astartes' ancient plate. It turned, its focus shifting from its handiwork to the new prey. It charged, moving with a speed that belied its immense size. Vorl met the charge, his power maul crackling with blue energy. He was a giant among men, but against the World Eater, he was a child. The Marine didn't even break stride, swatting him aside with a backhanded blow from its power-armored fist. Vorl crashed into a stone pillar with a sickening crunch and did not rise. Valerius fired. The searing ball of plasma struck the Marine's shoulder plate, melting ceramite and flesh, and drawing a roar of pain and fury that was more beast than man. It turned its baleful, lensed gaze on the Inquisitor. Kellen stood frozen, the psychic onslaught threatening to unmoor his sanity. He couldn't breach this mind, it was a fortress of fury. To try would be to have his own consciousness scoured away. Desperate, he remembered his oldest skill, the one that had kept him alive as a thief. He didn't try to attack or control, he glimpsed. He pushed his will, not against the rage, but through it, seeking not control, but pattern, a crack in the armor of the soul. He felt the pulsating, insane rhythm of the butcher's nails, the feedback loop of pain and anger that was the being's entire existence. And then, for a fleeting nanosecond, he saw it, a memory, buried under eons of slaughter and bloodshed. Not of battle, but of a field of wheat on a world that no longer existed, under a sun not blighted by the maledictum. A moment of peace, of a self that was long, long dead. A name, forgotten by all but the deepest, most locked away part of this monster's mind, Eric. It was a sliver of sanity, a hairline fracture in the dam of fury. He focused all his will, every ounce of his empathic power, not on suppressing the rage, but on amplifying that single, buried memory. He poured the image into the World Eater's mind, the feeling of the sun on skin that could still feel, the whisper of wind through grain, the silence that was peace, not the silence of the grave. The World Eater stumbled. The roar of its chain axe faltered for a microsecond. Its head, encased in the brutal helmet, twitched. No, the silence, it grated, its voice a confused, rusty thing alien to itself. It was the opening Valerius needed. He stood from behind the shattered pew, aimed his plasma pistol with a duelist's grace, and fired directly into the breach in the Marine's neck joint. There was a flash of superheated gas and vaporized blood. The World Eater staggered, a guttural, wet gasp echoing from its helm. It fell to one knee. At that moment, Vorl, dragging himself up with sheer, indomitable will, lunged forward and drove his crackling power maul into the seared wound, unleashing its full charge. The massive form convulsed violently, then crashed to the stone floor with a final, ground-shaking thud, the last buzz of the nails fading into silence. The quiet that followed was deafening. Valerius stood panting, smoke rising from the overheated barrel of his pistol. He looked from the dead monster to Kellen, who was on his knees, vomiting from the psychic strain. The Inquisitor's gaze held a new, unreadable emotion. It wasn't gratitude. It was a cold, clinical reassessment. The tool had just performed far, far beyond its specifications. It had reached into the mind of a Chaos Space Marine and found a weakness. That wasn't a hound. That was a weapon of terrifying potential, and Valerius was now acutely, fearfully aware that he was the one holding it. Weeks passed. The righteous blade hung in high anchor, a sleek dagger against the bruised sky. Valerius's departure was imminent, his triumph complete. Kellen was summoned to the Spire-top observatory one final time. The view was, as always, terrifyingly vast. The hive sprawled out below, a continent of human suffering, and above, the Solace Scar churned, a permanent reminder of their damnation. The work is done, Kellen, Valerius said, his back to him, observing the scene as a master surveys his domain. The righteous blade awaits my command. This world is cleansed of its most immediate threats, and my report will ensure the Imperium's watch here is reinforced. Your service has been noted. The words were empty. Kellen could feel the finality in the air, thick as the pollution outside. My lord, what is to become of me? Kellen asked, his voice flat, all emotion burned away. Valerius turned. His face was a mask of calm neutrality, but Kellen, without even trying, pushed his enhanced glimpse towards him. He had to hear the truth, even if it was only in the Inquisitor's mind. He felt the thoughts sharp, cold, and meticulously ordered. The asset is unstable. The connection with Alara and the World Eater has accelerated its degradation. Its power has grown beyond all projected parameters, beyond safe control. A liability of the highest order, cannot be risked on the voyage, it is a warp attractant, cannot be left behind, it is a seed for a new corruption. The tool has outlived its usefulness, a loose end to be tied, cleanly, efficiently, for the Imperium. You will be taken with me, of course, Valerius lied, his voice smooth as polished glass. Your penance continues. The Imperium has many battlefields, and your unique talents will be of great service in the wider war against the archenemy. But Kellen knew the truth. He saw the brief, almost imperceptible glance Valerius exchanged with Vorl, who stood by the door, his stance rigid, his face a grim mask of duty. He felt the sergeant's unshakable resolve, the slight shift in his weight as he prepared to carry out his final, grim order. He was to be the last piece of evidence to be jettisoned, the final, quiet disposal before Valerius presented his pristine, heroic case to his superiors. The last vestige of his will, the core of the petty thief who had just wanted to survive, shattered. All the pain he had absorbed, Lyra's terror, Anya's betrayal, the machinist's silence, the prophet boy's chaos, Alara's devastating welcome, and the World Eater's buried moment of peace, coalesced into a single, unbearable point of anguish and fury. The walls in his mind, built over a lifetime to contain his power, didn't just break. They were vaporized in a psychic firestorm of pure, raw emotion. He didn't form a coherent thought. It was a raw, telekinetic, and empathic blast of his entire being. The massive observation port behind Valerius shattered inwards, then outwards, a cascading waterfall of armor-glass shards spinning into the void. Data slates on the desk exploded into plastic shrapnel. The obsidian skull on the desk, the symbol of his suppression, cracked down the middle with a sound like a mountain breaking, its damper field dying with a pathetic whine. Valerius was thrown back against the desk, a trickle of blood seeping from his nose from the psychic feedback. Vorl, his mind a fortress of disciplined null space, was only staggered. He shook his head clear, his training overriding the disorientation, and raised his hellgun, his face an implacable mask. The burst of power vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Kellen drained, hollow, and on his knees, gasping for air. He had done it. He had proven Valerius right in the most dramatic way possible. He was the monster, the unstable asset, the liability. Valerius stood, wiping the blood from his lip. There was no anger on his face, only a cold, vindicated satisfaction. You see, Vorl, the beast always reveals itself. There is no taming the witch, only directing its fury until it inevitably turns on you. There is no penance for their kind, only culling. He gave a single, curt nod to the sergeant. Kellen did not resist as Vorl hauled him to his feet. He was a shell, his spirit broken, his power spent. He offered no struggle as he was dragged towards the shattered, gaping maw of the viewport. The wind howled through the broken glass, whipping at his grey robes, screaming in a key he now understood. He looked out one last time at the hive, a vast, layered tomb. The billion lights of its windows and forges twinkled like a galaxy of false stars, a pathetic mimicry of the heavens from which they were severed. He thought of them all, Lyra, Anya, Jax, the boy, Ilara. They were all sparks, briefly flaring in the immense, uncaring darkness. His own spark had been used to light the pyre of others and was now being snuffed out. There was a strange, hollow peace in the certainty of it. Vorl released him. There was no scream. There was only the rushing wind, a terrifying, exhilarating freedom as the world fell away. The immense, tiered architecture of the hive spire blurred into a single, streaking painting of rust, light, and metal. He fell past the smog-belching mouths of the manufactoria, past the illuminated honeycombs of the mid-hive hab towers, through the tangled, dark canyons of the underhive where he was born, down towards the very bottom, the sump, where the city's waste, its forgotten things, and its used-up people settled into a final, silent, and absolute grave. Inquisitor Valerius watched the tiny figure disappear into the perpetual gloom far below. He turned to Vorl, straightening his robes, his composure fully restored. See that the debris is cleared away and the viewport secured. We depart for the righteous blade within the hour. There is a new chapter of service to the Imperium awaiting us. The hum of the hive continued, unchanged. Another spark had been extinguished. On Solace, trapped in the shadow of the maledictum, it was the only end there ever was.
durch des Himmels prächtigen Land laufen Brüder eure, und laufen Brüder eure, und freudig wie ein